Okay, let us pray po.
Let's bow down our heads and feel the presence of the Lord. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Most powerful and loving God, we praise you, we adore you, we glorify you. We give you thanks for your abounding goodness and generosity, despite our unworthiness. Today, O God, in a most special way, we ask for your grace to sustain us and inspire us to do and fulfill our tasks relevant to our studies. The classroom setting now may be more challenging, as we do not get to be together physically. The delivery mode of learning is virtually, but with you on our side, we will be able to carry this out. Help us, O God, to be honest and responsible students. May your goodness and generosity continue to strengthen us to shun away evils and temptations, and inspire us to cling unto what is right and good. We unceasingly pray for all the sick, the burdened, and for all who are suffering because of COVID-19. We sincerely pray too for our continued protection, safety, and wellness, O God. We pray all this in your most holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rosette.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wal barakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim ghairil maghdubi 'alaihim waladdallin. Amin.
All right, good afternoon, class. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Opo, please turn on your camera, mga pogi at magaganda. O, hindi tayo behind the scenes. Tayo ay mga actors and actress. O, yan. Di ba? Go, Mark Hernandez, Clarence. Okay lang, Angelica. Angelica is not feeling well. Andiyan na ba si Mayo? Parang andito ba? Parang ang dami nating wala pa si Mayo, tama ba ako? Tsaka si Gwyneth. Mayo. Wala nga. Cortez. Wala rin. Wala pa sila. Mara, sila pa yung wala. Silang dalawa. Tama? Tsaka si Gaius. Gaius, baka, teka lang, wait lang. Baka nandiyan si Gaius. Ito na si Cortez. Okay na si Cortez. Okay, sige lang ha. Siguraduhin nyo lang nandiyan kayo. Okay. Si ano lang, bale, si Gaius ate ha. Para pareho tayo na attendance, okay? Alright, so let's continue our lesson with hyperbola. This is the last conic. Ito na si Mayo. Conic section, okay? So let's start. Wait lang. Okay, so ito po. Ay, ano yan? Wait lang ha, saglit. Kamali ng pindot. This and this. All right, so here. So this is what we're going to learn for this lesson. Nakikita nyo na ba? Ayan. So, at first, we will define hyperbola. And then write the equation of the hyperbola in standard form. After that, we will use properties of hyperbola to solve real-life problems. And we will sketch, of course. Sketching of the graph is very important, no? And then finding equation as well, no? Of the graph of hyperbola. Okay, so these are the things that we have to learn from this lesson. Okay, I hope you are learning although we are online. Okay, so if you cannot catch up, please do not hesitate to tell ma'am ha. Magpaiwan kayo. Mas mabuti pa yung magkaharap tayo kaysa mag-PPM kayo sa akin. Is that clear? Kasi madademonstrate ko sa inyo. Alright? Okay, so let's continue. Now, ano to? Nagre-reload pa? Wait lang ha. Hindi nagre-load properly. Wait lang po. Anong nangyari? Ayaw niya mag-reload. Okay, ito po. Bakit ganon? Wait lang. Ayaw niya mag-reload. Hindi makita. Okay, if you're going to look at your book, okay, meron tayong definition eh. Can you read the definition there ng hyperbola? Nakandito kasi kaya lang ayaw niya mag-reload. Ito na lang, siguro tong PDF na lang siguro. Share ko na lang tong PDF. I think this one will do. Ayan, here. Ito na lang PDF. Ayaw mag-reload nung PPT, Google Slides. Alright, according to the definition, alright, so sabi niya, a hyperbola, this is very important ha. We will have to define because the definition, our computation will always be based from the definition of the terms that we will be using or properties of your hyperbola. Alright, so a hyperbola is the set of the points in the plane, alright, in the difference of the distance, whose distance from the fixed points, F1 and F2 or F sub 1 and F sub 2 is constant. So these F sub 1 and F sub 2 are what we call the foci. Okay, the foci of your hyperbola. So this is your hyperbola. It may look like a parabola, but this one is symmetric to each other. All right? Okay, so again, before we can solve an equation of an hyperbola, we should learn first the things that we need to learn in hyperbola, like the parts. No, yun katulad ng ginawa natin sa ellipse. Okay, I'll stop sharing this one ha. I'll change this one to my here. Okay, tingnan natin. Ay, sorry. Okay, here. So let us this video first. Pagka dito na lang ha, hindi ko na siya enlarge kasi pagka na-enlarge doon siya nagloloko.
The first day of class, filled with possibilities and unknowns. That's why Check Study Pack empowers you with home.
Okay, there. Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Circle, ellipse, parabola. We saw some interesting things about these conic sections earlier.
MJ,
But remember, there's one more conic section called the hyperbola. It looks like two parabolas which are mirror images of each other. But that's not the case. A hyperbola is very different from a parabola. Similar to the other conic sections, it has many interesting properties. For example, the cooling towers of the power plants or the nuclear plants are hyperboloid in shape. But why? A cooling tower should be shaped such that first, it's efficient in the heat removal process, and second, its structure should be able to withstand heavy wind pressure. Also third, constructing it should be cost-effective, that is, building it should require as less material.
Ay, sorry. Wait lang, sorry. Sorry po.
Imagine you're standing at one end of a large room and your friend is at the other end.
Wait lang, sorry po.
The first day of class, filled with possibilities and unknowns. That's why Check Study Pack empowers
As material as possible. Hyperboloid is the shape which fulfills all these criteria. It increases the cooling efficiency, has greater structural strength, and requires minimum usage of material for construction. Another area where the hyperbolic shape occurs is the trajectory of comets. Some comets in our solar system follow an elliptical orbit around the sun, and they are permanently a part of our solar system. But a comet traveling at a very high velocity, such that it can escape the sun's gravitational pull, follows a hyperbolic trajectory around the sun. Such comets pass through our solar system only once. Isn't the hyperbola an interesting shape? Let's understand what exactly a hyperbola is. Consider 2 points on this plane. Let's denote these points as F1 and F2. Now consider points on the plane such that the difference of their distances from these 2 points is constant. What do we mean by this? Consider this point P. Let's say the difference of its distance from these 2 points is alpha. That is, PF1 minus PF2 is equal to alpha. One thing to note here is that by difference, we mean the absolute value of the difference. That is, distance to the farther point minus the distance to the closer point. That's why the point P, we subtract its distance to the closer point, F2, from its distance to the farther point, F1. Now the question is, are there any other points the difference of whose distances from F1 and F2 is alpha? Yes, there are many such points. The collection of all such points is called a hyperbola. Consider this point Q on the hyperbola. The difference of its distances from the 2 fixed points will be equal to alpha. Since for the point Q, F2 is the farther point, the difference QF2 minus QF1 will be equal to alpha. Similarly, for this point R on the hyperbola, its distance RF1 minus RF2 will be equal to alpha. So a hyperbola is the set of all points in a plane, the difference of whose distance from 2 fixed points in the plane is constant. By difference, we mean the distance to the farther point minus the distance to the closer point. These 2 fixed points together are called the foci of the hyperbola. Notice that unlike any other conic section, a hyperbola is made up of 2 curves which are mirror images of each other. Now here we took the constant difference to be alpha. If we take any other number as the constant difference, we will get different hyperbolas. Let's say we take the constant difference to be beta, which is greater than alpha. Then we will get this hyperbola, which is narrower than the previous one. If we take the constant difference to be gamma, which is less than alpha, then we will get this hyperbola, which is wider than the previous one. So we see that depending on the value of the constant, the hyperbola becomes narrower or wider. Now tell me, doesn't the definition of the hyperbola remind you of any other conic section? That's right. Its definition is similar to that of ellipse. We know that an ellipse is a set of points, the sum of whose distances from 2 fixed points is constant. In the case of the ellipse, we consider the sum of distances, while in the case of the hyperbola, we consider the difference of the distances. So we see that their definitions are similar. Remember that for an ellipse, we saw what its center, its major axis, minor axis, and so on really mean. Also, we saw the relation between the length of the major axis, the minor axis, and the distance between the center and one of its foci. Such axes and the relations also exist for a hyperbola. We will look at it in detail in the next lesson. To stay updated and to keep learning such interesting things, do subscribe to...
All right. So what is a hyperbola? Unang-una, where do we use hyperbola? Based from the video, what are the most two common things wherein we use hyperbola? In real life, so, what is the application of hyperbola? Anybody from the group? Saan daw ina-apply yon? Yes, Ahmad. Ay, are you raising your hand? Saan daw po?
Power plants daw po.
Okay, sa mga power plants, no? Yung mga cooling tower. All right. Okay, very good, Ahmad. No? What else? Where else? Saan pa daw ginagamit? Yes, Jillian?
Sa trajectory of comets po.
Okay, no, very good. So trajectory of comets. So these are the things, or some of the things wherein hyperbola is being used. All right. Now, let's go back. Tingnan natin bago tayo pumunta dun sa susunod na lesson or sa susunod na video. Let us first recall what we have watched from the first video because this one is related to the second video that we're going to watch later. All right, so if this is our hyperbola, wait lang this one. Sandali lang mga anak Okay, here. Tingnan natin to. This and this. Okay, here. Ayan. So let's put it this way. Let's say, for example, that this is my hyperbola. Okay, recall natin yung pinag-aralan natin yung kanina from the video that we have watched. So, sabi niya, according to the video, so if this is my hyperbola, meron tayong tinatawag na points from here and this is what we call the foci, right? So this is our foci. So this is F1, F sub 1, and F sub 2. According to the video or according to the definition of hyperbola, so if you have a point here, a point on your hyperbola, let's say that this is point P, all right? Its distance from, kunin natin yung distance ito let's say this distance, okay, let me put it this way. Ito daw distance from point P to foci 1. Ayan. So, lagyan natin ng ito, Sulat muna natin. Okay. So, sabi niya, the distance from point P to F1 or foci 1 minus, that is the farther, farther distance. All right. Minus the distance from, all right, so yung distance daw dito, okay, from point P to point, or F sub 2 or foci, all right? So sabi niya, that distance daw from point P, F2, ayan, all right. Notice that this one is the farther, farther distance, while this one is the shorter distance or closer distance, all right? Mas maiksi to. Now, sabi niya, according to the definition, that if we subtract this distance, the value or the difference will always be a constant. Diba? Constant daw lagi. That's why it's represented as alpha. All right? Now, sabi niya din, according to the definition, that if I'm going to get another point on my hyperbola, let's say, for example, I have a point here. So, dito ako maglalagay. Sabihin natin nandito tayo. Okay? Or dito, kahit dito na lang. That's another point on your hyperbola, diba? So, this one. Okay. So, let's say that this is point Q. Ayan. And that point Q is on your hyperbola. Now, if you will notice, the further distance from foci is Q to F2, right? O, siya, tingnan natin Kung lalagyan natin siya ng marka, that the distance from here, ito po, from Q to F sub 2. That's the further distance, right? So, sabi niya, according to the definition as well, so sabi niya, the Q from the distance from point Q to the F2, that's the farther distance, minus the Q or the point Q, the distance from point Q to foci 1 is also constant. Ayan. So, ibig sabihin, equal lang daw sila, Hello. Wait lang gawan natin to ulit ng distance, itong dalawa. Ito yung sinasabi niya rito. Yan. Yan, Sabi niya, itong dalawa daw na to, kahit saan pa yan, kahit saan pa yan kalayo dyan, mag-i-equal siya. Which means, sinasabi niya lang dito na si PF1 minus PF2 is equal to QF2 minus QF1. Alright? Kasi para-parehong distance lang nila. Okay po? Hello. Are there any question with this? Do you understand the definition of hyperbola? And of course, sabi niya, which one, this formula is the same as what formula in conics? Saan daw? Anong conics daw ang kaparehas niya halos? Anybody from the
Ellipse po,
group?
ma'am.
Yeah,
Ellipse.
ellipse. Very good. So ano lang ang pinagkaiba nila? Kung ang ellipse ay sum, alright? Kung ang ellipse ay sum, ang hyperbola ay difference. Yun lang. Pareho lang naman din sila ng definition. Alright? So, do not be confused with that, ha? Okay, now let us learn more details about hyperbola. Okay? So let's watch this video. Tuloy natin, ha? Clear ko lang muna to. Okay na tayo dito, ha? Okay na tayo sa ano? Sorry. Wait lang. Exit ko lang to. Okay. Sabihin nyo kung hindi na ano, ha?
What? Still searching YouTube for math help? Are the videos from 2006 really helping?
All right, clear.
What is a hyperbola? Previously, we saw what it really
Here.
is. Do you remember?
Ha? Opo.
That's right. Now let's say we have two fixed points, f1 and f2 in a plane. Then a hyperbola is that set of points in that plane such that the difference of their distances from these two fixed points is constant. These fixed points together are called the foci of the hyperbola. Note that here, by difference, we mean the distance to the farther point minus the distance to the closer point. As we have seen earlier, the definition of the hyperbola is similar to that of the ellipse. It's the set of points, the sum of whose distances from the fixed points is constant. So similar to an ellipse, for a hyperbola, there exists its axis of symmetries and the relations between them. In this video, let's see what they are. Consider this hyperbola with the foci f1 and f2. The midpoint of the line segment joining the foci is called the center of the hyperbola. Now notice that if we draw a line through the foci, we can see that the hyperbola is symmetric about this line. It's called the transverse axis of the hyperbola. Look at these 2 points now. The points at which the transverse axis intersects the hyperbola are called the vertices of the hyperbola. Now, as in the case of the ellipse, there is one more axis of symmetry for a hyperbola. If we draw a line which passes through the center and is perpendicular to the transverse axis, we can see that the hyperbola is symmetric about it. This line is called the conjugate axis of the hyperbola. So similar to an ellipse, there are 2 axes of symmetries for a hyperbola. But unlike any other conic section, there is one special thing about a hyperbola. Consider this hyperbola with the transverse axis along the x-axis and the conjugate axis along the y-axis and the center at the origin O. We know that the 2 curves of the hyperbola extend indefinitely away from its center. Now for a hyperbola, there exists 2 straight lines which pass through its center like this. The special thing about them is that we extend the hyperbola indefinitely. The arms of its 2 curves keep approaching these straight lines and never touches them. They are called the asymptotes of the hyperbola. Notice that the 2 branches of the hyperbolas are contained inside the asymptotes. These straight lines are very helpful while drawing the graph of the hyperbola. Let's see how. We know that the center of the hyperbola is equidistant from its 2 foci and its 2 vertices. So as in the case of the ellipse, let's denote the distance between the center and one of its foci by C, and the distance between the center and one of its vertices as A. So this distance between the two vertices of the hyperbola is equal to 2 times a. It's called the length of the transverse axis. Now we define a quantity b as this. So b is equal to square root of the difference between the squares of c and a. This quantity b actually turns out to be the length of this line segment, which is perpendicular to the transverse axis and whose one end point is the vertex and one is the point where it intersects an asymptote. Similarly, it's the length of this line segment. So 2 times b is the length of the conjugate axis. Now considering these two lengths, we can draw a rectangle like this. We can see that the asymptotes of the hyperbola are extension of the diagonals of this rectangle. So if we know the length of the transverse axis and the conjugate axis, we can easily draw a rectangle like this. The diagonal of these rectangles will be the asymptotes of the hyperbola. Now using these asymptotes, we can draw the hyperbola such that it's contained between these two asymptotes. And as we move away from the center of the hyperbola, the arms of its two curves approach the asymptotes. So we see that the asymptotes of the hyperbola act as guiding lines in drawing the graph of the hyperbola. Now let me ask you a question. According to the definition of the hyperbola, the difference of distances at each point on it from the two foci is constant. But what will be the value of this constant? Here we've denoted the length of the transverse axis and the conjugate axis by 2a and 2b. Can we find the value of the constant in terms of a and b? We will see this in the next lesson. It will help us in finding the equation of the hyperbola, which we will find out in the next lesson.
All right. Okay. Ayan. Okay, stop na muna natin ha. So, have you seen the different features of hyperbola? Okay, so let's recall. Baka mamaya hindi natin naalala. So, recall ulit natin katulad ng ginawa natin kanina ha. Okay, wait lang. All right, so let's put it this way. Balik tayo dun sa ating drawing. All right. Ayan. So, if this is our hyperbola, again, let me annotate. All right. So let's put it this way that we have points here, which is our foci, no? So let's say that this is foci 1 and foci 2. All right. Now, sabi niya, okay, the midpoint between the two foci, ano daw tawag natin doon, class? What is that midpoint? The line.
Center po. Ay.
Yan, very good. Nakikinig sila. Okay, so that line that passes through that, ayan, so ito tayo, no? So pag kinuha daw yung midpoint between F1 and F2, and that's what we call the center. So ito yon. Wait lang ha. Dito, ito yung center natin. Okay? So that's the center. Okay? Yan. Okay. So, yan yung center natin. Now, this line that passes through the foci, no, your foci and your center, ano daw tawag natin dito?
Transverse axis po.
Yan, very good. It's called transverse axis. All right. So, sulat natin ha. So, we call this as transverse axis. Okay? Ayan. So we have the transverse axis. Again, remember that the transverse axis is the line passing through the foci and your center. Okay ha? Parang kumbaga sa major axis siya yung, kumbaga sa ellipse, siya yung major axis. Pero dito, sa foci, sa hyperbola, ang tawag natin is transverse axis. Do you understand? And another line, no, that pass through the center and it's perpendicular to your transverse axis. Anong tawag daw natin doon?
Conjugate axis po.
Okay, we have conjugate
axis.
All right, so let's draw. Draw natin ano? Okay, so ito yon. Ayan. Okay. So, yan yung ating tinatawag na conjugate, no? Conjugate axis. A conjugate axis is an axis passing through your center and it's perpendicular to your transverse axis. Sige, lagay nyo lang yung definition dyan para maano nyo. Ang mahalaga, nakikita nyo at ang mahalaga po, alam nyo siya, ang i-define kahit na hindi nyo isulat. Kasi you know what's happening to the details, no? So, do you see the difference between transverse and conjugate axis? Again, I repeat, transverse axis passes through your foci and the center, while the conjugate axis only passes through the center. All right, and it's always perpendicular with your transverse axis. Now, knowing that this is your parabola, all right, and you know that there is a point of intersection between your transverse axis and your graph of parabola or your curve of parabola. At ito yon, di ba? Ito, itong point na to. Ayan. So, anong tawag daw natin dyan? Hello?
Vertices.
Yan, vertices. Very good. So, we have two vertices here. So, this is vertex 1 and vertex 2. All right? Remember, ha? Again, I repeat. All right? The line, your transverse axis, no, intersect with the curve on your hyperbola, and that point of intersection there is what you call the vertices. All right. Now, what about its distance? O meron pa pala, mamaya, meron pa. Ano pa yung line daw na nagpa-pass through the center? The two lines that pass through the center, kasi di ba sabi niya, as this hyperbola, okay, extends, di ba, extending yan on both sides. So meron daw tayong two lines dito, but never touches the hyperbola. What do we call that?
Asymptote.
Yeah, very good. We call it as asymptote. So drawing natin, ha. So this one would be your asymptote. All right? Naku, sana sumaktong aking drawing. Okay, it passes through the center. Ayan. Sorry kung ang drawing ko ay ano ha. And another one, another asymptote that we have is this. So ayan, no, magpa-pass through siya sa center dapat. Ang tawag natin dito ay asymptotes. All right? Hindi siya pantay na. Okay na 'yan. Basta nagpa-pass through siya sa center. Ang hirap mag-drawing. Sorry for this. All right. So ayan ha. So this one is your asymptote. Naalala niyo yung drawing natin na nung grade 10 kayo? Pag sinabing asymptote, anong ibig sabihin nun? Kung rational function, anong ibig sabihin ng asymptote? Naalala niyo ba? Pinag-aaralan din nyo yan ngayon sa ano eh. Anong subject yung ano nyo ngayon? Kay Sir Janmat. Right? Sa functions. Sabi natin as the asymptote touches the ano, anong nangyayari? Kaya hindi yan nagtatouch kasi pag nagtouch siya doon nagiging
Undefined.
Jillian. Ha? Yes, Jillian? Nagiging ano siya? Jillian, yes, go ahead, Jillian.
Undefined.
Yeah, undefined. Okay.
Si Jill po pala.
Naging lalaki boses ni Jillian. Okay. O, sige, salamat pa rin. Alright. So, yun, no? Ganon din to. Pero the asymptote will never touch your graph here. Okay. Now, let's make our distances or our values, no? Ito. So, from here, we'll take the value. So, kung ito yung foci natin, and this is the center, so ano daw yung value na yun, class? Sige, drawing natin, ha? Ano daw yung value nito? If this is from the center, going to this foci, ano daw yung value na yan? That's the value of?
C po.
C. Very good, ha? Tandaan. From the center to foci, that's the value of your C. Do not forget that. Wait lang. Okay, so this value is value of C. Ayan, ito ha. So C yan. So meaning, from center to foci, no? Or focus nyo. Ayan. So, on the other hand, pag ganon, okay, from the center going there also, that's also C. All right. Now, what about now the distance from the center to vertex? Like this one. Ito. Ano daw yan? Ito guys, ha, i-drawing ni ma'am. Ito po. Ano daw tong value na to? From here
A
to
po,
here.
ma'am.
A po, ma'am.
Okay, that's the value of A, ha? Okay, so very good. That's the value of your A. So this one is the value of your A. So A is coming from the center to vertex or vertices. Okay, now how do we get down the B? How do we get down the B?
Same formula po, ma'am.
Okay, same formula. So we have B is equal to, sorry. B is equal to square root of what? Sige, ulit. B is equal to square root of?
A squared minus C squared po.
I squared. A squared minus C squared. Alright? So, ayan po tayo. Now, paano pala nagkaroon ng rectangle dito? Anong sabi niya? Kung ito daw yung ating asymptote, if you will notice, yung distance daw ng B, tingnan natin the distance coming from the B is here. Halimbawa ito, itong point na to, from here to this one, ay sorry. Teka lang saglit. Wait lang Okay, from here daw, from here, from this point up to this point, yan daw yung tinatawag nating B, 'di ba? Hello. So yan yung B natin. Right? Kaya, saan na ba yun? Wait. Okay, so ito yung value ng B natin. This is V. Alright? So from a point on the parabola and to your foci. And then, from foci to this point is also your B. Right? So sabi niya, kung may rectangle daw yan dito, draw tayo nga, kaya ba nitong rectangle? Kung may rectangle daw tayo dito, sorry sorry for this. Wala. Wait lang, sandali. Para masakto natin. Okay, kung may rectangle daw, ayaw talaga. Sorry po. Ayan, kung may rectangle daw tayo dito, let's say, ayan yung rectangle natin. Ano? Yung distance daw nito, eto guys, yung distance daw from here to here is the same as this. Hindi lang siya nakasakto ha. Kung ang point na to hanggang dito, the same daw yan as B. So syempre kung nandyan yan hanggang dito sa kabila, B pa rin yun. Yun yung pinaka height ng rectangle mo. Diba? Now, while the A, the center to your vertex or the center to another vertex is the value of A, which is the length of your rectangle. Okay? So, kaya yung asymptote daw, yun daw yung magiging diagonal ng ating ng ating rectangle. And this will serve as our guiding lines to draw your hyperbola. Do you understand po? Pero may tinatawag tayong length ng transverse axis. Nasaan ba yung length ng transverse axis natin? Anyone?
po.
Yes, anak? What is the length of transverse axis natin? Paulit mo, anak.
2A po.
Okay, very good, no? So the length of transverse axis is equal to 2A. Oh, so nasaan yun? From here, kumbaga yung tutong part na to. Ito yun from here, from vertex to this, another vertex. Alright, so that's A. Pag itinaas mo yan, yan din yung length nung taas ng rectangle. Alright? What about this one? Ito, anong tawag natin dito? What about the length of your conjugate axis?
2B po.
Alright, no? 2B. So, length naman ng ating conjugate axis. Okay. Oh, ayan. Is equal to 2B. Ito naman yon. Ito. Kumbaga, ilabas ko muna, guys ilabas ko muna yung rectangle dito. Ito. So, parang ganyan. From here, nakikita nyo pa ba? Okay, from here, class, if you will notice, from here po, from here, let's say that this is the center. Alright? This is the center and this is the vertex. Ayan. Yung layo niyan, that's A, di ba? From here also, it's A. So, ibig sabihin, this distance is the same as this. Diba? Alright. Ito naman, from here to here is your value of B. So, from here also is the value of B. And that's your conjugate axis, the length of your conjugate axis. And that makes up your rectangle. Now, yung diagonal nyo rito, sana ba yun? Wait lang ha. So, yung diagonal nyo, class, dito, that passes through this center, ayan, ito yon. Ito yung tinatawag nating asymptote natin. Okay? Hello? Naintindihan po ba? Guys, naintindihan po ang dinidiscuss ni ma'am dito? Can you please thumbs up?
Ma'am.
Kung naintindihan. Yes po.
Yung sa B po, hindi po ba mas malaki yung C kaysa sa A?
Ay, oo. Ito to. C squared dapat tayo o minus A squared. Sorry, hindi napansin ni ma'am. Thank you for that. Asan tayo? Asan na eraser? Yun. Sorry po. Hindi napansin ni ma'am. Nasulat na lang. Okay, it should be C squared. Pakicheck nyo din yung notes nyo, guys. Okay, thank you for that. Pag may nakita kayong naisulat ni ma'am na hindi na ayos, pakisabi lang, ha? Kasi minsan di ko napapansin din. Okay? Questions po? O, klaro na tayo dito. Alam na yung mga parts. This is very important, no? These are definitions, but they are very important or vital to our parts of hyperbola. Okay? Because you will be using that when we solve. Yes, sinong nagre-raise ng hand? Yes, Jillian? Are you raising your hand, Jillian?
Ma'am, kanina pa po ata yan.
Okay, okay. Ay, sige. Okay na, may tanong po ba? Time na yata tayo eh. Stop ko na to ha. Wala nang tanong ba? Thumbs up po kung wala nang tanong. Klaro to? Klaro? Okay, good. So, sige, clear ko na to. Ayan. Okay, so, it's already time. Sorry po, na-late na naman tayo ng 5 minutes. So, kaya pasok ng maaga para makastart tayo ng maaga. Ha, guys? Alright, so, tomorrow, okay, alam na natin yung mga parts. Ha? Ang gawin nyo muna ngayong gabi, mag-drawing muna kayo ng hyperbola, and then try nyo i-locate yung mga parts para hindi nyo malimutan. Okay? So that tomorrow, we will be starting to solve problems. Okay po? O siya. Goodbye, class.
Bye po, ma'am.
Thank you po, ma'am.
Thank you po.
Bye, ma'am.